morning, everyone, and welcome to the second of our two-part series, Engaging Prevention in a Virtual Environment. Our presenters today are Erin Ficker and Kris Gabrielsen. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Great Lakes ATTC, the Great Lakes PTTC, the Great Lakes MHTTC, and SAMHSA. The Great Lakes ATTC, MHTTC, and PTTC are funded by SAMHSA. This presentation was prepared for the Great Lakes ATTC, MHTTC, and PTTC under a cooperative agreement with SAMHSA. All opinions expressed in this webinar are the views of the speakers and do not reflect the official position of DHHS or SAMHSA. We are funded under the following cooperative agreements. And just a few housekeeping details. Today's webinar will be recorded and will be available on the Great Lakes current YouTube channel and the Great Lakes PTTC Plus page. There will be attendance certificates issued for everyone on this webinar. They will be emailed to you and may take up to 2 weeks. And during the webinar, if you are having technical issues, please private message Christina Spanbauer or Stephanie Bellman, as they will be able to assist you with that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Erin.
Thank you, and welcome everyone to our second of two-part webinar series on moving and engaging in prevention in a virtual environment. For those of you who were with us last Thursday, welcome back. We're so glad you decided to return and join us once again. We had a lovely time last Thursday with you. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we hope you had an opportunity to listen to the recording of the previous webinar. If not, we're just glad you're here today. So let me take a minute to introduce myself for those of you who might be new. My name is Erin Ficker. I'm one of two prevention managers here at the Great Lakes Prevention Tech Transfer Center, or as we like to call it, the PTTC. And I'm here from my home, as we all are, in Chicago, Illinois. We wanted to provide this series to you all as we are all in this moment, this very interesting and maybe odd moment where we are trying to connect with each other in new and different ways through virtual environments, as we are all writing out these shelter-in-place orders, as we are all at home trying to keep safe as this virus is taking its time to hopefully die out in time for us to all go back to school and continue our prevention work in the fall. So I am joined, so today we will be really focusing on, so last week we really focused on the different ways that prevention programs can move into virtual environments and the different kinds of ways we can do that. Today we're going to talk about, once you're in that virtual environment, how do you bring people into it? How do you engage them in that? And then once you're there, how do you facilitate in that environment? How do you keep people engaged? What are special considerations you need to think about? And we're really lucky, again, to have back with us Kris Gabrielsen, who is an expert in all things prevention, who's been in the field for a very long time, making her a very senior expert, I will say.
Careful again, yeah, careful. I'm like a very long time. Like, okay, is she going to start putting years in here? No.
No, I'm not going to. A very senior expert. I just want to be clear that you're very seniorer than me. But we are really delighted to have her. Her expertise stretches far and wide across prevention and has a lot of experience working in virtual environments and engaging folks. She joins us today from outside of Portland, Oregon, so we're really lucky to have her early in her morning. So this is one of those ways that we get to, in this environment and in this world, bring people together who we wouldn't normally be able to bring together in an in-person way with such ease. couple of things about our time together today. We are using a Zoom webinar format as opposed to the Zoom meeting format that we may have been more used to. So the way we will be using that is we have a chat function. So if you put your mouse to the bottom of your screen, you'll see you have a chat function where you can type in all kinds of chat things that you want to say. If you have a specific question, we ask that you use the question and answer, or the Q&A feature. And if you click on that Q&A feature, you can type in a question, and that question will be there, and all of the presenters and participants can see that question. If you have that same question that someone's already typed, you can like it by clicking the thumbs up. I believe it's the thumbs up icon. And that way we know that lots of people have that question, and we'll make sure that question, and actually it'll make that question rise to the top for us. And so we make sure that we address that question. So please use that. It's really a helpful feature for us as presenters to use to make sure we're getting those questions and they're not getting lost in this chat feature where often we see a ton of things going by really fast. So please do, if you have a specific question, put it in that question and answer, in that question and answer pod for us, and we'll make sure that we get there. So, and then use the chat feature. Again, if you do have a technical issue, we have two great tech folks with us today, Christina and Stephanie. You can direct message them by clicking on the right. There they are. They're or right-clicking on their names, or when you go to message someone, you can, it'll say to, there's a drop-down arrow you can pick, and they are listed as hosts or co-hosts, so they should be right up at the top, Christina or Stephanie, and you can pick them and then direct message them, and they'll get back to you with any technical questions, and they're really good at that. So they may also be putting some messages in the chat throughout, maybe some questions to some technical issues, they may be popping in some links, or some materials or links to materials as we go. Also, thank you for the reminder, EJ, that when you are trying to chat with a whole group, please make sure that you use that same drop-down menu for two and select all panelists and attendees. I think it might default to just all panelists. And while we love to hear from you, everyone would like to hear what you have to say. People don't as much enjoy listening to me read what you have said. And while I'm happy to do it, I don't think everyone loves that. So please make sure that you do select that to all panelists and attendees. That way we can all hear what you're, see what you're saying. And last week we saw people had so many wonderful things to offer, so many wonderful things to share, that it was a really rich discussion and a really rich sharing that we saw in that question, in that chat pod. So please do make sure that you choose that. If you have any questions about how to do that, Christina and Stephanie can help you. Kris Gabrielsen and I will be focused more on content, so we won't be able to kind of address those technical issues. I think that I have hit all of my technical points. Kris or Stephanie, or Christina or Stephanie will definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I have hit them all. I really want to turn this over to Kris so she can jump into our content. Oh, I do know one other thing I was going to say. You should have received, for our first webinar, we did send out a bunch of materials. We also sent out a bunch of materials. We should have sent out some materials in advance of this webinar as well. You should have received, in that email, you would have received a resource guide. What else did they get, Kris?
They received the 2 worksheets and the resource guide and the PowerPoint slides.
Mute?
Oh, can you not hear me?
We are not hearing you.
Uh-oh, I'm not muted.
Still not hearing you.
Hello, I think maybe Christina, do you need to enable me? Oh,
Kris.
Oh, others can hear me. Erin just can't hear
Christina,
me.
Can you remind us what was sent out in that email?
So hopefully you can hear me now. Okay, yeah, everybody else can hear me except for Erin.
Oh, maybe everybody else can hear you but me.
Okay. So they received the 2 worksheets and the PowerPoint slides and the resource guide. So I think probably you all heard me.
Everybody heard you but me.
Yeah.
I turned off my notifications so my computer wouldn't make noise, and it turned off YouTube. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I'm glad you can hear me now. I was like, this could be a little challenging to be.
I was like, I'll be translating and lip reading today.
That's right.
Sorry, all.
Let's see how Erin's skills are.
Thank goodness this is being recorded so everyone can see this.
Well, you know, this is our lives right now, right?
This is the fun. Great. So everyone knows what they received. If you didn't receive it, we will also be sending stuff out after the webinar.
Yes, and so in terms of the part 1 handouts, everything is going to be posted on the website, as Christina just said. So if you didn't get the email or you didn't attend the first webinar, everything will be up there. So you'll be able to access everything. So
awesome.
Be rest assured. All right, and I have to go back to Kathy Bloom, who I really appreciate. She pointed out that she started doing prevention when she was 15. So, you know, I could have been really young when I started.
There you go.
There we go, yeah. That's not the case, but I love the way you think, Kathy, so thank you. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. I want to go ahead and share my screen. Erin previewed this just a little bit already. But just our roadmap for where we're going today, so you know where we're heading. We're going to first talk about planning a virtual session. So in terms of how do you prepare, some tips on preparing, some tips on implementing a virtual session, and then tips on concluding it well. Then we're going to focus on challenges. So what kind of things do we need to consider to keep people engaged when we're doing virtual sessions and, you know, trying to get them on to virtual sessions. We want to talk about access disparities. Of course, this is an issue that we can't assume everybody has access to these technologies and are able to log on. And of course, youth safety is an issue because many of us work with youth. So we want to focus on some of those issues and considerations that we should take when we're looking at virtual sessions, including youth. All right, and next we have, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and Christina is going to pull up a poll for us because I am curious, as is Erin, how confident you're feeling in your skills to plan and implement a virtual event. Oh, and I forgot our first poll. Of course, attendance. This will be really helpful for us. So let's do this first. Whether or not you attended the live event last week, so a week ago. Did you attend it, you did not attend it, or you watched the recording? If you could share that, that would be great. We'll give it just another 15 seconds or so. All right. Christina, there we go. There's the results. All right, so almost 3/4 of you watched last week, and then another 5% watched the recording. About 22% didn't attend it. So with some of you, for those of you who weren't able to attend the live event, you might need to refer back to that, or excuse me, if you didn't attend the live event or watch the recording, you might want to go back if you're interested in filling in some of the gaps. We'll mention like the worksheets and some things we talked about last time. If you feel like that's some information you need to get, I highly recommend you go back and watch the recording to get some of that information. So thank you. All right, Christina, now I think there's the next poll. Go ahead and do the second poll. All right, here we go. How confident are you in your skills to plan and implement a virtual event? Not confident at all, moderately confident, or very confident. You could go ahead and indicate how you're feeling at this moment. All right, about 10 more seconds or so. All right, and Grace says you aren't seeing the poll. It should be popping up on your screen. For most folks, it just pops up. So not sure why that's not working for you. Sorry, that's not. All right, and the results are, look at that. Quite a few folks are feeling moderately confident, which is great. Some are not confident at all, 19%, and then some are very confident. which is not too surprising, right? Some of us have had some experience over the last couple months. Perhaps we've been able to increase our knowledge and expertise in this area. Some still might just be, this might all be really new to you. So what our hope for today is those who are not confident at all, we're hoping to bump you up to moderately confident. Those who are moderately confident, we're hoping to bump you up to very confident. And for the very confident folks, we're hoping you can really grab a few tips, or more than a few, that will help you, things that, oh, I didn't know how to do that, or I hadn't thought of that. We're hoping you get some of those nuggets today. All right. So as we mentioned, Erin's looking very, were you wanting to say something, Erin? Okay, you looked ready to jump in. All right. As we mentioned last week, we talked about a few different things. One is the very first step we need to do when looking at translating prevention strategies to virtual events are what kind of communication is happening. So is it one-way, two-way, one-on-one, or cross-team communication? And then taking that information, once you figure that out, and putting it into a couple of different worksheets. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to show you briefly what those worksheets are, to refresh your memory for those of you who were on last time. And for those who weren't, so you can get an idea. So the first step then is you need to do an organizational technology capacity assessment, figuring out what technology you currently have, what you have access to, what you have access to training to, and what you don't. So figuring that out first. And then once you've done that, move into this worksheet, which is the most critical piece. I mean, both of them are, but this is really the crux of the issue, is we want to take what your strategy is, who you're doing it with, and then really analyzing all the components of the strategy, what kind of communications needed, what kind of virtual platform could be used, what changes you'd have to make, the benefits, the concerns you would have, and the impact on the strategy. Once you've done all that work, then you're going to start analyzing what you can do with that. So we won't go through every question right now because we did do that last week. So we don't need to do that. But just a reminder that this is the step that needs to happen before the information that we're giving you the rest of today. So, or maybe in conjunction with, I should say. The information we're giving you today should not be standalone from this work. So at this point, I want to share one more document, and then we'll check on the Q&A once I do that. So if you have any questions, feel free to start typing them into the Q&A. The other document you should have is this resource guide. The resource guide has a ton of information in it. So if you haven't had a chance to open up the file, print it out, or look through it on a screen, please be sure to do that to see if it could be useful for you. If you go down to the third page here, you'll see that there are, all my other pop-up screens are covering. Let me move some things around here. Table of contents, you'll see section 1 is selecting a virtual platform. So if you still aren't familiar with the kinds of platforms that exist out there, we highlight a few of those and look at the pros and cons. We look at collaborative platforms, and go through pros and cons of those, or the descriptions of those. And then getting ready, we're going to talk about in just a minute, a little bit more about that. Section 3 is the virtual facilitation considerations, which is where we're going to spend most of our time today, as well as section 4, participant considerations. There's some fantastic tools at the end that are just really easy checklists that you can print out and use as checklists before you do virtual events. So hopefully those will be helpful for you as well. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. Erin, do we have any questions yet, or are we good to go so far?
No, I think that most of our questions have been answered in writing. The one question was kind of, are we going to learn some of these tips and tricks that we're seeing here? And the answer is really that most of that is actually in this resource document. It gives you some ways and some links to how to use Zoom features, and then actually features of other online meeting software. So we're not going to get into the details of exactly how to do that, but we will point you in the direction of places where you can learn that.
Yeah, and partly because we are a Zoom webinar, this isn't a Zoom meeting. We don't have all the functions that Zoom Meeting has, which Zoom Meeting also has similar functions, of course, to Ring Central and other platforms like that. So we can't use all of those functions at this point. We have, let's see, 238 people, and that wouldn't work well on a Zoom meeting. So we needed to move to this kind of a platform. But I also have to say that there are links in there for like Zoom tutorials, which the Zoom for tutorials, I use mostly Zoom. So that's where I've focused a lot of my time. They're fantastic. They're like 4-minute videos. So they're really short. They're concise. They walk you exactly how, step by step, how to go through to do things. So if you haven't explored Zoom tutorials, if you use Zoom, I highly recommend it. And there are similar kinds of help videos for other platforms as well.
Almost everything that we highlight in the resource guide, there are YouTube videos or highlight videos on those their websites for those platforms that will walk you through how to use different features. One of the things I'm learning in Shelter in Place is how to use YouTube to learn how to do all kinds of different things.
Isn't it amazing? It really
is. I really am learning a lot about how to use YouTube to learn how to do a plethora of random things. So, but there are a lot of tutorials out there that can help you learn how to do this stuff.
Yes.
So,
highly
hopefully that
recommend it, because then I can get really specific to what you want to do too. So how to create a poll in Zoom, just put that in Google. And up will pop the official Zoom tutorial as well as other people talking about it. So it's a really good resource to just pop onto
we'll
there.
talk about like maybe when or why you might want to use some of those different features with different kinds of audiences.
Yes. All right. Well, we have another poll for you. We aren't going to do polls all the way through, but it's just helpful at the start for us to get an idea of who you all are out there and what kind of needs you have. So, Christina, if you go ahead and put the next poll up, it's, have you facilitated a virtual session already? Yes or no? There we go. So, especially in these last couple months, have you ended up doing something that you perhaps haven't done before, or you might have been doing this for several years in different ways? But let's go ahead and see how many people have actually facilitated, not participated in, but facilitated or hosted a virtual meeting or training. All right, Christina, let's see what they said. All right, so 2/3 yes and 1/3 no, approximately. So that's great to know. And so what I would love to hear, because we have 2/3 folks that have already facilitated, if you could put in the chat box and then go ahead and do the drop down arrow so it says to all panelists and attendees so everybody can see. I'd love for you to share what has worked well when you have facilitated these sessions. What's a tidbit of information of what made these virtual events go well? If you could go ahead and type that into the chat box.
Smaller groups and fewer people. Using the hand raise function, that's great. Preparation, thank you, Ellen, great. Smaller groups than normal, having a co-facilitator using Microsoft Teams, practicing ahead, keeping mute, thank goodness for mute practice, keeping meetings small, giving verbal cues, having a tech person pre-registering, welcome folks to the meeting, having participants knowledgeable about how to use Zoom on the computer, having a producer to work behind the scenes. We hosted a coalition meeting virtually, and one of the things that made it great was that we were able to bring in guest speakers from outside the area. That's wonderful. Yes. Verbal cues on who's next to talk, introduce the tools, that's so smart. Sending out Zoom intro sheets to all, that's great, doing a little prep ahead of time. Keep the meeting concise and short. I think that's very smart in this kind of environment. Screen sharing availability, sharing screen availability, lots of interaction, checking in with people at the start as human beings, making sure everyone is feeling cared about in this pandemic. Oh, that's so nice. I think I really agree with that. We
All
just
right. Well,
did an orientation meeting.
these are fantastic.
Polls are great. Prep before the meeting. Y'all are
And
in
I
good.
love it. You're right on target with several things that we have written down that exactly you are doing so many things right. So many things that are helping to be successful in the virtual environment. So I'm curious if you could go ahead and switch gears a little bit and share any things that haven't worked well. What has kind of stopped you? Is like, okay, that didn't quite go as planned, or or things that you've hit some stumbling blocks. Any stumbling blocks? Sharing your screen, is that we need like a clear cut of where we're at stumbling blocks and when we're next.
It can go both ways.
Yeah.
So when I hear lack of engagement from participants, decline in participation, hard to get feedback, bandwidth issues, internet connections, cannot see faces, multiple people trying to talk at once, just getting them on the call, silence is the worst. Phones died and no one watched, having to coordinate multiple materials. I'm reading fast because you guys are typing fast. Lag, unstable internet connections, that's the worst. Audio connections, using the wrong tools to engage the audience, that's so hard to know. We'll talk about that. Today, first time using an iPhone, I know that can make things more difficult. Adding a co-host.
Technology.
Yep, right. Having user unfamiliar with Zoom, having participants' children interrupt. Well, yeah.
Erin knows nothing about that.
Nothing, never happened to me.
At all.
Access to Zoom functions vary based on the device. Learning to be okay with wait times. Horrible echo when speaking. Oh, that's my biggest pet peeve. Learning, lack of engagement, being the person who drops out of the meeting due to connectivity, comes back but nobody noticed. I'm so sorry.
That's not good.
I didn't mean to laugh at you. Oh, frozen horror face. I only get frozen in a weird face. Training team on Zoom and then not being able to see the same thing you have on the screen as host. That's so hard, right? I still see that some people are only sending to panelists. So if you just make sure that drop-down menu says 2 panelists and attendees, echoing's the worst. I know, right? People eating food. I heard someone the other day and it was like, chew, 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 spoon drop, chew, 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 spoon drop. I was like, I had to call them out. Animals and kids, right? I know it's so frustrating, but like kind of in this time, right? I think we have to give each other a little bit of grace.
Somebody snoring. That's not good.
Oh, my gravy.
That's not good.
Someone was filing their nails.
People are
there
getting
is
too
no
comfortable
grace
working
for that.
from home, I think. This is
grocery shopping.
Did somebody grocery shopping during the class?
Cat walking across the computer, picking teeth. Okay, we have some manners issues to deal with.
So we've got some etiquette things, it sounds like, that we're needing to do. But I have to say, this has been great fodder for some really funny videos that people have put together. I hope some of you all have seen some of the great Zoom.
I'm glad you can't hear my Roomba
videos. What was that one?
Someone says, I'm glad you can't hear my Roomba running behind me. I never would have thought of that.
That's great. I love it.
Oh, you guys are hilarious.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, we better move on. We go on.
These are hilarious.
But so some of these things, not all, because sometimes we just can't always control other folks and their behavior on these things, except we can control their ability to be on screen and different things. But some of these things, through strong preparation, we can help avoid. Now, some of it, like unstable internet connections and things like that, I wish we could all control, but there's not a lot we can do, but we sometimes can. So we'll talk about what we can do to increase the odds of having successful virtual events. All right, so as I mentioned in section 2 of your resource guide, it talks about a lot of preparation things that you can think about. Just really, we aren't going to go through everyone because they're pretty darn straightforward. But I'll give you an example of how I set up my environment here to be successful on this kind of a webinar. So this is for like bigger events where I'm presenting, I'm facilitating, whatever it is. I have a lot of backup. So for example, I have next to me my phone plugged in with my hotspot activated, and I'm using a laptop computer because it has more power than, or excuse me, a desktop computer because it has more power than my laptop. But I do have a laptop next to me with my hotspot available. So if my internet dies on me, I can go to the phone hotspot and get back on. I also have the phone number to call in with a Post-it on my screen. So these are all, you know, kind of worst case scenarios that everything falls apart on my end with technology so that we can continue to move forward. Now, if this is just like a committee meeting that I'm hopping onto, I don't do all of this. This is for kind of the bigger things where it's really important that I stay connected. I also have water, I have my coffee, I have 6 different pens out here, or 7, to mark on my agenda, which I highly recommend. Very detailed agendas. We have it for these kind of events where we have the time allotted, who's going to be talking then, what's going to be talked about, any special notes, like if there's going to be a poll or different things. So we know exactly what's coming up. I also have the PowerPoint slides printed out so that I know what's coming up, even though it's on my computer, so I don't have to be scrolling through. And then in this case, I have the resource guide too, in case I need to flip through. So I personally put in a lot of thought of what my environment's going to be so that I could successfully sit here and talk with you all and not be fumbling around, because that's really easy to do. It's you think, oh, I've got it handled, but unless you think through what your own environment is, including, I have 2 dogs and a cat, but there's 2 doors in between me and them, so they can't bother me. My kids have been told 5, 6, 7 times that I'm going to be on this and they can't interrupt me unless it's an emergency, and they have to stay off their devices so they don't suck up my bandwidth. So all these things will help increase your ease in terms of facilitating a virtual session, and also the likelihood that you'll be successful in terms of your technology and other things. So that's prep work. And there are other things like what you're wearing, even like don't do lots of stripes because it can look funky on the screens. Go to your resource guide and look through the full list. All right, so section 3 of your resource guide gets into the actual facilitation tips, and then we're going to pull out a few of those and talk about those. I'm going to switch over to a PowerPoint slide with those tips on there. All right. So the first one, as I've already mentioned, be sure to review the guidance documents, tips, and tricks. Some of the other things to think about. First of all, limit the focus to 1 or 2 topics at the most, if possible. So like if you have a meeting, don't try to tackle the usual agenda items that you might in an in-person meeting. Everything takes a little longer or a lot longer to do virtually. So if you can, try to focus on just 1 or 2 topics for your session. Stick to meeting basics. So you'll go back to the basics of, set clear objectives for your meeting or event, use an agenda, email documents ahead of time so folks can look at them ahead of time, take breaks if your session's going to be very long. So all those basics that that were made you successful in an in-person event, in-person meeting, please carry those over to your virtual events as well. Be as interactive as possible. Now, we talked about with this webinar setting, we can't be as interactive as we'd like to be, but in things like Zoom meeting, you have a lot more tools at your disposal to be interactive. So let's talk about a few of those. One is breakout rooms. Again, if you don't know how to use breakout rooms, Google how to use breakout rooms in Zoom. Really, really clear. And practice. Get a group of people on so you can go, and because you have to be the host in order to practice the breakout rooms, because you have the button for breakout rooms. If you're just a participant, you won't see that button. So gather your lovely family members or your friends or your coworkers and say, can we just all practice this? And then you can hand off host to other people so everybody can practice during that time. So gather, 4, 5, 6 people if possible, and that will be really helpful for you in gaining your knowledge and security that, okay, I know how to do this. I can make this work in an actual meeting or training setting.
And don't be afraid of, I would say, don't be afraid of breakout rooms.
Exactly, yeah.
They're a little unnerving, they're a little scary, but really, if you're going to be in a virtual environment for an extended period of time, doing things that you normally would do in person, a breakout room allows you to have the kind of small group discussions that you may have previously had in a classroom. So if you did table talks in a parent class, if you had groups of kids talk to each other about an issue, or did book groups, whatever it was that you were doing and had people turn to each other and talk, you can do that in a breakout room. It takes longer, it's a little bit more cumbersome, but truly it creates connection in a way that you can't create in a full group. So I think it's a great, I would just caution you to not be scared of the breakout room.
Right. And I have to say, it works for larger groups too. I was doing a training yesterday. We had about 90 people on. We did use Zoom meeting. Our Zoom meeting goes up to 100 participants that we had. So we were getting really close up there. But I was like, let's do it. We're going to do 20 breakout rooms. And it worked great. It was wonderful. People came back in. I had people chat of how did it go. And it was, everybody had a lot of positive things to say, because especially in larger groups, you don't get a chance to talk, and that's your opportunity. So to break out, I usually do breakout rooms of like 4, 5, 6 people at the most. All right, we need to keep going though. Make sure we get all these tips in. So other ways to be interactive, polls, have you seen, is one way. Discussion questions, opening up discussion questions, people answering either verbally, depending on the platform you're on, or in the chat box. Asking for feedback, using one of the ways that I like doing it the best on when you're, they have the gallery view and you can actually see people, is how are things going? Thumbs up, thumbs down. It's a really easy way for a facilitator to see quickly how things are going. Or from 1 to 5, how are you feeling about this? 1, you're feeling horrible about it. 5, you're feeling great about it. And then, or somewhere in between. Again, then as a facilitator, you can just scan the tiles really fast and get a good overview of where people are at. So don't be afraid to have people use hands, not just technology kind of things. Whiteboards, if you're using Zoom meeting or other platforms like that, most of them have a whiteboard function available. And again, this is a great thing if you're going to practice the breakout rooms, practice the whiteboards, because there is the function, an annotate function that people can go to and click on, and then all the participants can be writing on that same whiteboard document that at the same time. If you have too many people, that doesn't work because you end up writing all over each other. But if you have a smaller group, the whiteboard function can work really well. All right, next, check participants' access to the virtual platform. We will talk about that more in the Access Disparities section towards the end of this webinar, but that's a key piece in your planning piece, of course, preparation piece. You can have great plans, great preparation, but if folks don't have access to either the technology or the internet, then it will all have been for naught. So make sure you take the time to check on participants' access during this preparation phase, and hold a practice session if possible. So for these kind of webinars, Christina and Ann and Stephanie, Erin, and I got together on Tuesday for an hour or half an hour or something. walked through the agenda together, what was going to happen. We're going to do these polls and here and there, and this is who's going to talk. So we were really clear about what was going to happen. So kind of big functions or trainings, I would say if you can schedule a practice session, that would be ideal. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move into during the virtual session. So this is the preparation, and we're going to go ahead, unless Erin, you want me to pause for any questions?
Let's take,
okay.
Yep, let's take a quick pause because we do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
There was a couple questions about breakout rooms. We had someone just ask kind of what they were. Breakout rooms are when you take the participants and put them in their own kind of virtual rooms. And so they're small groups that where it feels a lot like where we are now, but there are only a few people. You cannot do them in Zoom webinar, but you can do them in Zoom meeting, which is unfortunate. If we could do that here, we would love to try that. But it's an opportunity to be as if you were in a in-person training, and they said at your table or turn into a small group. So it's a small group conversation. It's really lovely. So someone asked, how do you handle breakout room safety when working with children? 2 facilitators can't be in 5 breakout rooms. Absolutely true. So you have to judge your own safety. My experience with my children in the breakout rooms they've done in their schoolwork has been done either when there is a facilitator that can be in every room or after they have established ground rules. So for the first couple times they did breakout rooms in my son's 5th grade class, they had someone who could be in every room as a facilitator. So, and then once ground rules were established, then they were able to let the kids do small groups, and you can check in and out. So if you are doing it with a group of kids that have not been together and do not have relationships, I think that might be more difficult. I would check with any school administrators you're working with, check in with people about what they're comfortable with, think about what you're asking them to do in those groups, that kind of thing. Think about how you can check in, but hosts can pop in and out of a room to check in. So that was one of the questions. Someone said, we are looking into using Padlet.com and Zoom to facilitate virtual community mapping. And do you have any experience? I do not. Kris, do you have any experience with?
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay. There was another question. Does anyone has used Blue Jeans? So someone's asking if anyone's used Blue Jeans. That came up on our previous call. I have not used Blue Jeans. I'm not even familiar with it, and I meant to look it up during the previous week, but I haven't. If someone has, feel free to answer in the chat. I know it came up, people have used it. It sounds like it's really interesting, but I have not. So if you want to share a little bit about that in the chat, feel free to do that.
One other, how do we use whiteboards? And that's a function,
yes.
at least in Zoom meetings. And it's something that when you go to share screens, you have an option to click on a whiteboard. So you would click share screen and then whiteboard.
Yeah, and so there's all kinds of things you can do with a whiteboard. So you can use it to kind of like, you can use it to have participants write on it, you can write on it, you know, you can share it, you can do a lesson with it the way you would use a whiteboard in a classroom. So if you're doing a youth program, if you're doing a parent program, if you want to, you know, kind of use a shared space, if you want to do a parking lot, those kinds of things, but definitely practice it. Definitely know, the other thing to always know is what your participants can do and what you can do. So if participants have the ability to use the pen and write, they will know that and they will use that. I was on a very large school Zoom call with an author this morning of a book who we'd invited to the entire school, and we had some student using a pen and writing on the screen.
Oh no.
Yep. So know what they can do, know if you can limit it, and if you can't limit it, what the expectations are for use. So if you're working with youth, you want to think about that. if you're working with adults, you also want to let them know, hey, you can also write on this if you'd like them to. If you would not like them to, also how you can limit it, or if you can't limit it, what the expectations are. So whiteboards can be really cool.
Great. All right, I'm thinking we better switch gears because we want to make sure to get, but I love that some folks are answering the question about Blue Jean in the chat. That's exactly what we were hoping you would do. So thank you for sharing your expertise. All right, so let's look at what do we do during the virtual session? Some folks mentioned several of these things during when we asked what was going well in your sessions, in the virtual sessions you've been doing. One was, you had mentioned, begin with a check-in, and super important, especially in this time. If it's a smaller group, it's great to do an individual check-in. Spectrogram is something where you can put up, like you put up your PowerPoint slide, and you can have people annotate on your slide, and they can indicate how they're feeling about things on a spectrogram. And there's other things like with checking in with folks. You can, if it's a larger group, you could do a one-word check-in. So just, how's everyone feeling today? Summarize it in one word, and then you have to call on people because it's not like going around the table, of course, but just call on folks for a one-word check-in. You could also do the 1 to 5, like a presence check-in. Sometimes is helpful of how present are you feeling at this very moment in time. Are you feeling like you have 10 other things going on, including your kids and your dogs and your other work going on, or are you feeling fully present to this moment in time? So that's another way to do a group check-in at the beginning. Establishing ground rules. This can be helpful for folks that you are going to meet with over time. So not necessarily for a one-time session isn't always needed, but for example, if you're working with a community coalition or your colleagues that you're working over time, like staff meetings, to be able to establish those ground rules so that there's a common understanding of how you will function as a group virtually can be really helpful. If you look at page 18 of your resource guide, there's some suggestions in there, but there are things like one person on camera, all people on camera. So it's not that, 6 out of the 8 are on camera and the other 2 are just kind of watching. The other things are, once you start the session, stay in one place for the time so that they aren't grocery shopping as they're going along. So those are ground rules that you would work together to establish and you all agree on, so that then there's buy-in to actually doing it. So again, that's probably for groups that you would continue to meet over time. Moving at a slightly slower pace. Just expect that things will take longer. This is kind of the 1 to 2 topics when you're preparing. Everything takes longer virtually. So if you're like at the breakout room, instead of saying, hey, turn to your partner and to actually do the technology of dividing them up, then you have to click join, and then people get in there, and then they're kind of, oh, here we're here. And it just takes, so a 10-minute breakout session actually is more like a 15-minute one to get people in, get people out, and have them be in there. So just know that it will take a little longer. Something else that's really important with virtual meetings in particular, and trainings, is to call on people. It can be really hard if we're expecting everybody to just jump in, because so many people end up talking over each other. It's harder to get the visual cues of somebody who's going to start talking, that we can get in a room. So you might just have people raise their actual hand, or you can have them raise their virtual hand. And what's really important is if you're making decisions as a group online, before a decision is made, go around the virtual room and call on everybody and just see if anybody has anything else to say before the decision's made, or if a vote is going to happen, whatever it might be, because there's some people who are very quiet, even quieter in a virtual session than they might be in person. And you want to make sure their voices are heard before decisions are made. So really important to pause and do that. And last but not least, build in energizers or breaks. I saw somebody posted a question earlier of how often, or after what period of time would you take a break? I typically, I do like some training sessions that we do over 8 weeks for an hour and a half each week. With those, I always try to do an energizer at least halfway through, about 45 minutes into it, that we do some kind of stretching. I have them stand up and we do something to move your body, because sitting too long, as we all know, is really hard, especially to keep absorbing. So my recommendation, every 30 to 45 minutes to do an energizer or an actual break. A few, yep, nope, that was it. That's what I wanted to say with the energizers. Erin, do we have any questions? We need to do it kind of quickly so we can move on. Anything crucial? Okay, let's go ahead and forge on then. A few thoughts on concluding your virtual session. So when you're concluding it, ending it, few important things to do, which also are important to do when you're in person, is clearly outline the next steps. So even if it's something like this, you will hear at the end of our webinar, we'll talk about what's going to happen, of emails that will be sent out, any future events that are coming up. Those are clearly outlined at the end, as well as if it's a meeting, to outline the to-dos. What do people agree to do and by when? To summarize that all at the end is incredibly important. Solicit feedback on the event from participants. So if it's a group that used to meet in person and you've switched to online or virtual, check in, say, how'd this work for you all? Was it successful? Anything we need to do differently next time? And last but not least, this is really important, and this can lead into the engagement piece that we're going to talk about next, is be sure to end on an energetic note. I've been on quite a few events in the last few months where we get to the end and the facilitator presenter will be like, okay, so that's it, bye. And you're like, oh, okay, it's over. Oh, okay, goodbye. And there's really no, it kind of ends here with energy versus ending with, oh, wow, that was really great. I can't wait to get on again, instead of it feeling like drudgery to get on. So some things that you could do with ending on an energetic note are things like you can have everybody, if it's smaller groups, say verbally, or larger groups in chat, sharing what if, I liked, or I wish. So they would say from the session, something that, well, what if we did such and such for the next time? It would be a what if. Or I liked about the session, I liked that we spent time covering this topic, or that we used these tools to do it. Or I wish, so I wish for the next time that we could do da 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 da. So that's a way for them to give input and reflect on what's just happened. You can do the one word around the room like you do at the start. You can do that at the end. And then another way that I'd like to end virtual sessions are creating a top 5. So what's the top 5 things that folks found most useful from the session? And again, they can put in the chat box, or they can say it verbally. So just a few ways to end on an energetic note. All right, with that information, I've just thrown quite a bit at you in terms of preparation, actually implementing the meeting, and then concluding it. I'd like to do a check-in on how we're doing. So Christina, if we could put up the next poll, I'd love to know how it's going so far. I'd love for you to say, I have no idea what you're talking about at this point. You've gone way too fast, or this is beyond me, or I'm somewhat understanding the content being shared, mostly following along, or I'm right there with you, Kris. So let's see how we're doing. All right, Christina, could you go ahead and share the results? All right, so we're doing pretty well. We've got most folks are either right there or mostly following along, so that's great. Please do feel free to use the Q&A if there are parts that you're like, oh wait, what did you just say, or what were you talking about, to make sure we don't lose you. So thank you, that's great to know. All right, Erin, any questions that have come up that we want to pause and talk about at this point?
I do not see any at this time.
All right. Well, let's go
Lots
ahead.
of great comments though. So if people want to scroll through the chat, I see lots of great comments that people have shared.
Great. Thank you, everybody. All right, let's go ahead and move along then and talk about access disparities. Because as we mentioned earlier, we can do all the great preparation and even implement it well, conclude it well, but if we don't have participants there, it's not going to be really helpful. So some things to consider. It's not necessarily just that people have access or not. It could be different things like the quality of the internet connection, which some people said things that didn't go well were things like people cutting in and out or the lag time. A few things to consider with that. If you have somebody who has poor quality of internet connection, if you're in something like a Zoom meeting kind of platform, have them turn off their video camera or their camera, because that can help. At least they can hear and you can hear them is one thing that you can do. I know with my computer, another thing that you might consider is closing out everything else that you have open. So before sessions like this, I even close out my antivirus technology that's on here, because it can kick on and then it starts sucking up I'm not going to use the right term, but my capacity of my computer to be working. I close out anything that's going to pop up, messages, anything that would be continuing to go on in the background. By doing this, I find my computer works much better with all of these virtual platforms. So that can be another tip for both you as well as your participants if your quality of internet connection isn't really great. Some folks might have access only through a cell phone, so you'll want to make sure that the platform you're using can be used successfully through a cell phone, and or if it can be used, can you use all of the functions like the interactive functions with that? So something to do, to consider. People might have the computer, they might have the phone, they might have tablets, different things, but they might have outdated technology. So that can impact their ability to participate virtually as well. Poor cellular service, especially in rural areas. In some rural areas, they have no cellular service. So perhaps they can only call in. So providing call-in functions from a landline can also be a way to include folks who might not be able to access the virtual technology that others are able to. If you have folks accessing by phone only, super important that you get out anything that you're going to be showing on screen beforehand. So emailing out, if you're having PowerPoint slides, you're going to refer to anything, pull up any documents that they have those in front of them a different way. The number one challenge for access for folks, though, is the cost. And that's what we found, that they found through research when they were looking at access disparities, that mostly it comes down to finances, which is, of course, not surprising, right? So some things that we need to do as we're looking to connect with our participants to look at access disparities is to identify what the specific challenges they have. So looking at that previous list, which of those is it, or is it something completely different? And then brainstorming the solutions. Is it purely finances, or is it they could access it once things open up? I realize some in terms of accessing Wi-Fi in public locations. I know our library's starting to work on opening up again, but even through all this, you could go sit in the parking lot or in the lobby area outside and access Wi-Fi this whole time. Community centers, of course, lots of folks access it through coffee shops and restaurants again, in once we get into the different phases with the restrictions that lots of states have. So those are some possible solutions. The other thing, though, is tap into folks who have already been exploring this issue quite a bit, especially the schools. With distance learning, they've had to put a lot of thought into this, a lot of protocols and policies and ways to get around this, or to work to help bridge these access disparities. So if you haven't already connected in with some of those folks, I highly recommend connecting with them. Erin, did you have something that you wanted to share with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you touched on some great points. And I think one of the things that's a real struggle about this is we have talked for years. We've been having conversations about this really very serious issue of lack of access to what really is a utility of internet access. It's a very serious problem, and Kris and I have spent some time really looking into how do we support this, how do we deal with this, and all of the information that we found is truly kind of pre-COVID, meaning that it really are things like accessing it through public spaces. Those public spaces are now closed, so we're in really uncharted territories. So really your best bet, as long as those public spaces remain closed, is partnering with community organizations that may be providing services to families who can't afford it. So whether that's the school district, whether that's another community serving organization that's providing services and funds. I know there are, in this area, we have organizations that are providing funds to families to purchase internet access monthly and we've had a reduced service costs. So just people communicating that, people getting funds to folks to do that, that is something that we can work with. Those are all new territories. So unfortunately, we don't have these great answers like, here's how you get access to folks who don't have access. The answers that we all have are from a world that we don't live in right now. So I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that no one really has great answers in this moment for how to address this issue in this moment. And it may be that if you live in a community or you service a community that has low internet access from for your participants, that moving into that environment may not be the best way to equitably reach your folks. And so you may have to find different ways to do that, or to put some of your services on hold or in a different venue right now. And I know that's not a great answer, but I just wanted to say, until things open up in a different way, that may be the situation that we're in.
Brandon brought up a good point in the Q&A of would difficulty and our inability to use technology count as access disparity? Absolutely.
100%.
So Brandon says, I work with a number of older adults who struggle to use newer technologies such as Zoom and smartphones. Absolutely. That would definitely be counted as a access disparity. And so putting into place different options. I know I'm working with a nonprofit group here in my community, and we're dealing exactly with this, that we're looking at having a big vote on something this coming week. And so trying to make sure that all the members have access. And there's some folks who are unwilling to go onto Zoom. So it's not even a matter of even being willing to or try. So absolutely. And that's where you have to figure out where your participants are at, because it can be for all kinds of different reasons of why they don't have access. Mm-hmm. Yes. All right. Well, I'm thinking we should move on to engagement, but I would love and Brandon says that's exactly what we're going to as a nonprofit. Okay, great. Good. Going through. Feel free, as we are moving on, if there are any other ways that you have addressed access disparities, we'd love for you to put them in the chat box, because you all are so creative. I know in other times we've gotten other great ideas about how to address access disparities. So feel free to start posting those in the chat to everybody. All right, next, let's talk about engagement. So how do we keep people engaged in prevention activities during this time, and in particular in virtual environments and virtual platforms, virtual trainings, et cetera, et cetera. So a few thoughts on, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to PowerPoint slide. So a few things to think about keeping volunteers engaged as well as others. So if other folks or who you're working with, participants, et cetera. First of all, schedule with current circumstances in mind. I'm sure that this has come up already for you all, but when you have previously met, for example, as community coalitions, that time might no longer work with folks due to working with distance learning with their kids, or perhaps their jobs have changed or not at all. So all these circumstances of people's lives, of course, have changed. So doing that assessment to see when it will work best will be really important. Next, something we mentioned a little bit earlier, but is consider mini meetings. If you can keep meetings short, trainings short, like 30 minutes or less, you're going to have a lot more participation. So perhaps something they used to do in person for 2 hours, can you break that up to 4 different sessions over the course of 4 weeks, for example? People are going to be much more likely to be engaged, active, present, all those kinds of things for 30 minutes than they would for a longer session. So something quick, to the point, make people feel like their time was really worth spending on that can be really helpful and can keep bringing them back for additional times. Work on some quick wins. This is, we all know it's been a challenging time, a frustrating time, a lot of things we don't have control over. So again, back to the example of community coalition, if there's something that you could do as a community coalition that is a quick win, like within a month, you can feel successful at having accomplished something, try to figure out what some of those things are. What can you accomplish? What's an event, a public event you might have to put on virtually that you could pull together pretty quickly? What is a way that you could gather input from the whole community? Maybe if you're doing a community readiness assessment, what's a creative way that you can do that? And you could even do a drawing for prizes or different things. What are some things that you can actually accomplish within a short period of time? Again, that's a great way to keep people engaged and feeling like they're putting their time and energy and effort in is actually accomplishing something. Last but not least, keep things fun, if at all possible, in any way. Keep them light. If it's drudgery, it's like the last thing you want to do is get on and hear more, have it be more of a drudgery kind of session. If you feel like your life force is being sucked out of you by sitting in, you're going to want to sit in. So what can you do to keep things light and fun? I mean, in this time when most people are working from home, it can even be something like show and tell, where somebody brings, or a couple people bring something that's meaningful to them to share with the rest of the group. So this is, a group that's kind of meeting over time. That's a way to get to know each other more, and it's a way to keep things fun, as well as help really increase the bonding of the group as well. Another fun thing to do is what are you looking at? So it's just taking your camera and showing it out your window. Now, most blinds are closed, like mine right now. We actually have sun. I'm in Oregon, but we have sun coming through, believe it or not. There's proof. Sun does come through sometimes. But one time I logged on to a meeting with somebody, and he didn't have it on him. He just had it facing out the window. And I was like, oh, that's just so nice. I was like, we know what each other looks like. We don't need to see each other right now. Just see what we're looking at. Can be a fun thing to do. So get creative on keeping things fun. Erin, any thoughts or questions that have come in about that? All right. I'd love for folks to share in the chat box any other ways that you've kept things fun, you've kept people engaged. What are some things that you've been doing recently? Love to see that. Let's take a pause and let people type in. Yeah, isn't that, Susan? That was so fun, especially if you're on a session with people from around different locations. I mean, within your city could be fun too, because you could see like somebody's backyard or whatever it might be. But it is very fun to see different locations. Icebreakers like what you're binge watching, absolutely. People want to know that right now, right? Including youth on our calls, yes, and we'll be talking about that more in a little bit. They definitely can help keep things light. Erin, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you so they can hear a different voice than mine.
We start our meetings with self-care share. I love that. Laughter yoga. I don't know what that is, so I'd love to hear more about that.
Yes.
I Spy with my little eye with my wife's nieces and nephews the other night just to keep it fun. Oh, that's fun. We've been doing themed backgrounds. Those are always fun. I move the camera to focus on my cat so people don't have to stare at my face. I know I'm tired of staring at my own face.
Yes.
I attended a meeting where they set up a bingo game. Oh, that's fun.
Oh, very fun.
Would you rather? Definitely a great idea to keep people engaged. Why contemplating nature? I know I'd love to show you all my lilac bushes, but you can't smell them, so it's not really worth it.
Oh, I don't know. I think it'd be nice to see.
Smells so good. It's like a French perfumery out there. Yeah, lots of great ideas. We play a Kahoot in the Zoom meetings. Yeah, lots of great ideas for keeping it fun and keeping people engaged. We had some music dance parties during the youth summit. Yeah, we've had some school dance parties. Lots of different ways to keep people engaged. I did have a teacher recently talked to a student who was feeling really down about how one of the bonuses of being on Zoom is that we get to know each other in a different way. You know, I never would have, he talked about, I never would have known that you had a dog with the same name as my dog, or I never would have seen the cool artwork in your living room. And you would have never known that I just painted this wall yesterday because it was yellow last week and it's blue today. And it was a really nice way to connect about, and there are some issues around. I know some students don't want to have their houses be seen, but he talked about there's a different way that we get to connect, which I thought was nice.
Great.
So,
love it. All right, well, and I think that's a good segue into including virtual environments. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here. I have a few true-false questions for you all to think about some youth safety issues. So, Christina, could you go ahead and put up the first true-false, please? All right, so first, youth are allowed on all of the most popular virtual platforms. True or false? All right, we're going to go through these kind of quickly. So let's see, Christina, go ahead and show the results. What do folks think? False. You are 67% said false, and that is correct. That it is false. A lot of platforms have age minimums that people have to meet in order to be on that platform. Let's see. Am I muted? Can you hear me, Erin?
yes.
Yeah, something's going strange with muting and unmuting. I'm not sure what's going on.
Yeah, we're seeing a message there.
Okay, so as long as you can hear me, let me know if I stop being heard. So if you are looking at holding a virtual event where youth need to be involved, be sure to check on your virtual platform of what age, if there are any age limits for that. All right, Christina, next true or false questions. Settings on virtual platforms can be changed to enhance safety for youth. True or false? All right, Christina, go ahead and show that results. True, absolutely, yes, that is true. And if you look at page 24 of your resource guide, for those of you who use Zoom, it actually walks through things to look through on the settings that you can change to enhance the safety for youth. Thank you. All right, let's see, page 3. True or false question number 3. There we go. Youth permission forms are no longer needed since we are not meeting in person. True or false?
You're tricky with these ones,
All right,
Kris.
Christina, go ahead and show the results. False. That's exactly
Good job,
correct.
guys.
Yep. It's going to look a little different, the kind of permission form, but I would definitely encourage you to work with your the organization with which you work, or your funder, to see what kind of permission forms are needed at this point. So Good job. Last true or false question. Christina, Zoom is a useful platform to use for public events that include youth. True or false? All right, Christina, let's see what they think. True.
Oh.
And this is one that
This
is
is a tricky
actually
one.
false. I tricked you. We did those ones once before and I tricked them too. So don't feel bad. All right, I'll go ahead and close this out. The reason why Zoom isn't great, and it's because I put in for public events. So to have a public event where a Zoom link is put out to whoever would like to join is not safe for youth because people can connect up with individual participants like in the chat box or different ways and seeing who's a youth and who's not. So for public events, I would not use Zoom. Private events where you're just sending out to the youth and parents or whatever, that's a different story, but for public events. For public events, I would use one-way communication that's typically one-way communication type strategies such as like Facebook Live, Instagram Live. There's the Twitter, what's that called? Twitter chat, that was something new.
Twitter chats.
Twitter chats, okay.
One way.
So yeah, do something like that where folks can't see, or even something like Zoom webinar like we're doing right now. We can't see other faces. That's much safer for the youth. So trick question there, but you all did great. Let's see, I think we have one question that's come up. Erin, did you want to?
Yes, so we did have someone who said they're getting ready to try Botvin's life skills and concerned how this will work out. I'm sure there are a number of folks here who have tried, and I know there are a number of people around the country who have been doing or have been trying Botvin's life skills in a virtual setting and thinking about how that will work. Definitely some considerations for how to do that and how to engage. So one of the things, Melanie, I would encourage you to consider. So folks, first of all, I'm going to say, if you are doing it or have done it, please throw some thoughts in the chat for Melanie, and for whoever else gave it a thumbs up. I appreciate that. One of the things I would encourage you to do is sit down with that worksheet and think about the components of that program and how you're going to do it and how you may have to adapt it. Also, reach out to the developers of Botvins and ask them. I know they have some tips and they have been working on ways to adapt it to the virtual environment so that it's more useful and that you can be as close to kind of a faithful implementation of that program as possible. Definitely a lot to think about. Any tips on how to adjust display and delivery of content and materials for Prime for Life and TNDA, which I can't remember
Probably
which.
towards no drug abuse.
Towards no drug abuse project. Yeah. Oh, project. I always say P.
Oh, the project towards no drug abuse.
I always get the P. So again, those ones, Prime for Life, I'm not sure about. Project Towards No Drug Abuse, I'm not specifically sure about. Again, folks, if you're doing any of those, please throw any tips in the chat, reach out to the developers, use that worksheet. Any of them you really need to check with the developer. One of, I know the key questions is whether or not you can record those sessions. You also need to be careful about recording any sessions that youth are in attendance for. But also thinking about how to take some of those multiple components online and how to work through them and engage. So you really want to look at your curriculums individually. So I can't really spend time today here giving specific tips on specific curriculums, but use the worksheet, go through the components, think about how you're going to adapt those components, talk to the developer. The developers are working really hard to make adaptations or communicate their concerns or their suggestions to folks who are using those programs.
And that's what I'm seeing in the chat box, that somebody like Megan said that you can reach out to Prime for Life. For sure, they have been helping a lot.
Good.
So just what Erin's saying, if it's like a box curriculum is what I think of, like with Botvin's life skills and things like that. Many of those folks are doing this. Now, if it's something like policy change or different kinds of things, you might have to work through those on your own. And again, if there are things that are significant changes of how you're going to do it, as we mentioned last time, be sure to check with your funder that they're okay with the changes that you're making, because we don't want you to get in any trouble with them.
And anytime you're accessing youth, if you're accessing them through a school, a community organization, however you're accessing those youth through, you really want to be talking to them too. So if it's through a community organization or through a camp or however that works, please be having good conversations with them too about what they're comfortable with, what permission slips they require, and those kinds of things. Sure, you're already on top of that. But for those of you who are thinking about going that direction, please be sure you're having those conversations. Looks like the Menendez Foundation is allowing that for Too Good for Drugs. So anyway, really think that through.
Great. All right, thank you. And I love all the information in the chat box. Thank you everybody for posting that. So start doing a little bit of wrap up here, or a lot of wrap up, I guess I should say. We're gonna wrap up. Some things to keep in mind, which we've said, but just reminders. Use the worksheet. Start with the organizational technology assessment. See what you have available, what you don't have available, what training you have available to you to use those platforms or the technology, and what you don't, so you know where you stand. Use those worksheets. Use the worksheet in terms of walking through each of your program or strategy that you have to be able to see what you can and can't do. Use that resource guide as you're moving towards actually hosting virtual events. Use the resource guide as best you can for whatever parts of it that you need help with. And last but not least, really important, give yourself some grace. I know we talked about this at the end of the last webinar as well, but we aren't going to be able to do everything that we did before in person virtually. It's not possible in any way. It's not because of shortcomings that we have, it's just not a possibility. So figure out what you can do and what you can do well, and really focus on those pieces and give yourself some grace that that's okay if you aren't doing everything that you were doing before. So I'd love for you to post in the chat box one thing at least that you've learned during the session. What's one tidbit of information that you are going to take and run with after the end of this session? If you could go ahead and post that in there. And it says, are there any tips or pointers about program evaluation? Are you thinking about any tips of doing it online or just continuing with your program evaluation? Not quite sure, Mark. So seeing like features about breakout rooms people learned about, being organized ahead of time, preparation is crucial. Erin, I'll go ahead, and if you want to read any.
Zoom tutorials, the breakout rooms, features of Zooms. I really love the idea of whiteboards, how-tos for Zooms. I hadn't thought of permission slips for virtual. As a funder, this is something we need to look into, having a backup plan, spare computers, ending on a high note. I love the idea of starting the meeting with a self-care share. Love the suggestions to end on a positive note. Polls and Zooms, features and Zooms, whiteboard information, mini meetings is being very important. Thank you for the backup plan tips, using thumbs up and thumbs down, like the idea of limiting topics to 30 minutes.
And I'm going to jump in for just a second and say I saw that because things are scrolling through pretty fast. Somebody pointed out that in Zoom, in order to do breakout rooms, you have to enable them in your settings.
Yes.
So that is a really important thing that I didn't figure out for a very long time with Zoom. Is it's very important to go in your settings. So this is like when you're logged into your account online on the computer is where I find it to be easiest to do. Go in there and go to the settings, and they have a lot of things that are not enabled. So why they kind of default to not letting you do a whole lot. So you want to go in and very carefully look through each one. Also, when you're doing that, if you are working with youth, have your resource guide in front of you about the settings for youth, because that's the same place that you would want to either check enabled or not enabled if you're working with youth. So
That's a great point.
Important point that somebody said during this,
Yep.
as the chats are going through really fast.
Go so fast. I saw someone else said, make sure to go through Zoom tutorials. I mean, I think there's so much to be learned on Zoom tutorials or whatever you're using, whether it's Microsoft Teams or Google Hangouts or Google Meets or whatever it's called. Those tutorials are going to be your friend as you learn this and get through this. There are privacy and permission issues that we need to talk to with our schools. Checking in is so important. Being able to help those who have bad internet connections, absolutely. Thinking through those issues before you start and after you start to notice there are issues that maybe you weren't aware of. That is so, so true.
Great. Well, feel free to keep putting in if you think if there are any other tidbits that were helpful to you. By putting them in, it can also spur people's thoughts of, oh yeah, that's something I want to remember again. So it's helpful to put those in there. So please feel free to keep doing that. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Erin, for some last valuable information to share with folks.
Sure, and a great segue is the comment in the chat that says, I had to join late. How do I get the resource guide? We will send a follow-up email that will send, again, a lot of the resources that you should have received, including the resource guide, which we believe to be a fantastic resource that will walk you through all of these things. Including the worksheets that we talked about, a guide to CSAP strategies and considerations when taking them online, worksheets on how to think through taking your prevention strategies online, and excuse me, and the resource guide. Excuse me.
It chokes you up, right? It just chokes you up. It's
so beautiful. It's like a
so
baby.
Beautiful.
Put it into the world. Excuse me. We'll also have a recording of this webinar along with those resources will be posted on our website. Christina, if you could let us know in the chat when we would expect that to be posted on our website and our YouTube channel, because that'll be something you can share with your colleagues. We are really excited to share this with the world. We feel like this is something that hopefully can be useful to you and to your colleagues moving forward. There is an evaluation link that you will receive by the end of the week. Oh, thank you. You're so fast. And she'll send out a link to everyone. If you don't receive that, you can reach out to Christina and she will get it. But please wait till the end of the week. If you don't receive it by Monday, or if you don't see it on the website, then go ahead and email Christina. But give her a little bit of time to get that out to you before you email her. We will be sending you out to an evaluation link. We take very seriously your feedback, and we want to make sure that we count everyone who participated in this webinar. So please take a minute to do that for us. And excuse me, thank you so much for being here with us. We are going to try to, and I'm going to be very clear, I'm going to try to go through the chat from the first webinar and from the second webinar, and to summarize some of all the great tips that you gave each other. It may take me a little bit of time, and see if I can share some of that you shared with each other and send that out as well, because I think you guys shared a lot of great tips with each other. So give me a little bit of time, because that's going to be a bit of an effort to go through all that. We'll cut and paste it into Word, and I'll go through all of it and make sure we get some of that. A summary for you guys.
I wanted to just jump in. Michael had posted, do other providers have templates for permission on youth engaging in virtual prevention? I'm wondering if anybody has that kind of a resource to share. If you could, if you happen to know him, just go ahead and contact him, or if you're willing to share that, if you have a link to your website, you could post a link in there. That would be great.
Or if you wanted, you could send it to me. You should have my contact information with your registration, and I can share it with their group. I want to just thank you guys for your awesome participation. This is a large group. It is hard to participate in such a large group, and you guys were generous with each other. You were generous with us, and I want to thank you so very much. I hope you found this useful. I hope you have great success in taking your prevention into the virtual environment. I hope you find this useful during the absolutely bizarre time that we are living in. I hope that this time ends and we can find ourselves back in our world where we can be with our participants. And I also truly hope that this will be useful to you beyond this time as we move forward. So thank you so very much. And we are going to push you guys, I believe we're going to send you guys out into our evaluation.
Well, hold on. It looks like
Oh, no.
people are still posting in the chat. So
Oh, okay.
Christina was just going to pause for just a minute.
Oh, yeah.
We'll go
Give us
ahead
a
and
minute.
turn ourselves off so you don't
Okay.
have to see us anymore. And then we'll be closing out in a minute or two.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you, everybody.
Thank you so much, guys.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.